So picture this. A family earning $12,000 a month walks into a bank,
Yeah.
right? They sit down with a loan officer, run all their numbers, and they're told, well, they can only afford a loan for a $1 million HDB flat.
Right.
But then the banker clicks a few buttons on a totally different calculator and looks up and tells them, actually, you qualify for a 1.8 million private condo.
Yeah, which sounds completely backwards, I know.
It's wild. And welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at this massive stack of property market data, recent policy updates, banking rules, basically trying to figure out why the upgrader journey right now, here in mid-2026, has been just completely turned on its head.
It really is a landscape just full of contradictions right now. I mean, if you're an HDB owner looking to take that next step, the old playbook you might have relied on even just a year ago is essentially obsolete.
Right, and that is exactly our mission today. We are cutting through all the noise.
Yeah.
So no luxury market headlines, no expat rental trends, no investor flipping strategies. We are focusing entirely on you, the HDB owner, trying to figure out your next practical move.
Exactly.
And I'd say the biggest takeaway from the data we reviewed this week is that the traditional stepping stone, right, from an HDB to an executive condominium or an EC has fundamentally shifted. Because of those sudden rule changes back in May, the window for a quick upgrade is narrowing, and the math has just completely changed.
Yeah, it really has. Though, before we really get into the weeds here, we should probably throw out a quick disclaimer.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Basically, all the figures, the loan quantum estimates, the prices we discussed today, they're indicative. They are here to help you conceptualize the market and, plan your strategy. But we aren't making any guarantees because obviously market conditions, interest rates, your individual financial profiles, they fluctuate wildly.
Right, you've always got to crunch your own numbers based on your specific situation.
Exactly.
So before you can even figure out where you're moving to, we need to establish your launching pad. Like, what is your current flat actually worth right now? Because the data shows this massive wave of flats hitting their MOP, their minimum occupation period, right now.
Oh, it's a huge wave. We are talking over 13,000 units reaching MOP in 2026 alone.
That's a lot of units.
It is, and the geographic concentration is super heavily skewed. So over 11,000 of those are in the North region alone.
Okay, wait, 11,000 just in the North.
Yeah, just in the North. And that kind of volume creates a very specific market dynamic. You have this huge cohort of homeowners who are suddenly holding a highly liquid asset, all looking around and asking, well, what's next?
Right, but okay, let's unpack this. Because conventional wisdom says if 13,000 flats are flooding the market, shouldn't prices be dropping? An oversupply means sellers have to drop their asking prices to compete with each other.
You would think so, right?
Yeah. But the data says the exact opposite. The equity potential we're seeing in these newly MOP-ed flats is just staggering. I mean, look at the recent record breakers we found.
The numbers are crazy.
Totally. A 4-room in Angmo hitting 1.15 million. Another 4-room in BDOC South reaching 1.12 million. A Clementi 4-room setting a record at 1.28 million.
Yeah.
And even a two-room in Queenstown recently went for 695,000. So, I mean, are buyers just getting desperate, or is there some rational calculation happening here? Why pay over $1 million for a resale flat when supply is practically peaking?
There's actually a deeply rational calculation happening, and it all comes down to the premium that people place on time and on certainty.
Okay.
Buyers aren't just paying for the floor space anymore. They're paying to skip the queue.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go the traditional route and apply for a new BTO flat, you're looking at a 4 to 5 year construction wait.
Right, which is a massive chunk of time.
Yeah, it really is. For a lot of young families or professionals, those 4 years are crucial. They want to start their lives now. They want to put their kids in a nearby primary school now, not half a decade down the line.
So they're essentially buying back 5 years of their lives.
Basically, yes. And, it's not just the wait time either. You have to factor in the new BTO classifications that came in.
Oh, right, the Prime and Plus models.
Exactly. Those newer Prime and Plus flats come with a massive string attached, which is a 10-year lock-in period. So if you're a buyer looking at a Prime BTO, you wait 5 years for it to be built. Then you have to live in it for 10 years before you can sell it or even rent it out.
Wow, so that's 15 years of your life just locked into one single property decision.
Yeah, 15 years. But a standard, newly MOP-ed resale flat on the open market, it only has a 5-year MOP. You're buying a fresh 94-year lease, you can move in immediately, and you retain total future flexibility.
Ah, I see.
That flexibility is exactly what commands that $1 million premium.
Okay, so as a potential upgrader listening to this, you're holding a very valuable hand right now. You sell that highly desirable MOP flat, you unlock all that cash equity, and traditionally, your next move is pretty obvious. You look at the sandwich class option, the executive condominium.
Right, the classic EC route.
Yeah, it's historically been the perfect bridge to private housing. But here's where it gets really interesting. As of May 8th, 2026, the government just completely rewrote the rules for ECs. The MOP for any new EC site tendered from May 8th onwards hasn't just been tweaked, it's been doubled. It is now 10 years.
It's a huge shift, and we really need to break down how that timeline plays out in reality, because the 10-year clock doesn't start the day you sign the papers.
Oh, right.
It only starts ticking when the project gets its TOP, its temporary occupation permit. So when you factor in the 3 to 4 years of construction, you're realistically looking at a 13 to 14-year effective lock-in from the moment you commit to the purchase. Exactly. Think about that. If you buy at 30, you aren't seeing any capital appreciation from that property until you're 44.
Wow. That fundamentally changes life planning. I mean, if we're talking about a growing family, a 14-year horizon means you're locked in from the time your kid is in preschool, basically until they're finishing secondary school.
Their entire childhood.
You can't upgrade, you can't downsize, you can't decouple to buy a second property. Why force such a massive freeze on mobility?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the state's intent is actually very clear here. They looked at the transaction data and saw this glaring trend. Roughly 75% of ECs were being sold within 5 years of hitting their MOP.
75%, that's massive.
Right. So the EC was no longer functioning as this affordable, long-term home for the middle class. It had transformed into a subsidized investment vehicle. People were buying them specifically to endure the 5 years and then immediately flip them for a private property windfall.
Basically a stepping stone they never intended to stay on.
Precisely. So the government is stepping in to aggressively reposition the EC. They want to ensure that if you buy an EC, you are buying it to actually live in it for the long haul.
So they're trying to strip the speculative profit motive right out of the public housing pipeline.
Yeah.
And they didn't just change the lock-in period either. They also severely clamped down on who can actually buy these new ECs. They introduced a 90% first-timer quota for the first 2 years of a new launch.
Yeah, and this is the real bottleneck for our listeners today, because if you're upgrading from an HDB, you are classified as a second timer.
Right.
So under these new rules, 90% of the units in a new launch are fenced off exclusively for first-time buyers for those first 2 years. So you, as an upgrader, are fighting with every other upgrader in the entire country for a tiny 10% slice of the pie.
That sounds brutal, though the data does highlight a small shrinking loophole. There are 5 pipeline projects, developments like Senja Close and Woodlands Drive 17, that were tendered before the May 8th cutoff.
Yes, the final 5.
Right, the final 5. They're grandfathered in. They still follow the old rules, so they have a 5-year MOP in the old quota system. I have to imagine the showrooms for those specific projects are going to be absolute war zones.
Oh, it's creating a highly concentrated frenzy. I mean, any upgrader who wants that 5-year turnaround is going to zero in on those specific units. But, even if you manage to secure one of those grandfathered units, there's another major rule change that affects your cash flow.
What's that?
The removal of the deferred payment scheme, or DPS.
Oh, right. Because under the old DPS, you could pay a small upfront fee and essentially hit pause on your mortgage until the EC was built and you actually collected the keys.
Exactly.
So removing that is like having to pay the full toll before the bridge is even built.
Yeah.
You have to start drawing down your loan and servicing the monthly mortgage while the property is literally still an empty plot of dirt.
And remember, you're likely still living in your current HDB, which means you are servicing your existing mortgage while simultaneously paying the progressive mortgage on the new EC.
Oh, wow. That dual cash flow requirement is incredibly heavy.
It is. It forces a lot of upgraders to drain their savings or rely heavily on their CPFOA just to stay afloat during those construction years.
Okay, so let's map out this reality. The EC route now means you're either locking yourself in for 14 years or you're competing in a frenzy for the final 5 grandfathered projects, all while managing a brutal dual mortgage cash flow.
Yeah, it's not pretty.
So if you look at that and say, no thanks, your natural pivot is to skip the EC entirely and look straight at the private condo market, specifically in the OCR, the outside central region. But the sticker shock there is very real. We're looking at median EC prices around 750 PSF in 2025, private OCR condos. They're pricing anywhere from 2,100 to 2,500 PS.
It feels like a massive leap. But what's fascinating here is how the banking rules completely warp what affordable actually means. It's an affordability paradox based entirely on the type of property you are buying.
Right, let's bring back that family from the beginning of our deep dive. The family earning $12,000 a month. Let's say they want to buy an EC.
Okay.
Because an EC is classified as public housing for loan purposes, it falls under the MSR, the mortgage servicing ratio. That rule states your mortgage payment absolutely cannot exceed 30% of your gross monthly income. So 30% of $12,000 is $3,600. That's their ceiling, which means the absolute maximum loan they can get is around $1 million.
But if that exact same family pivots to a private condo, the MSR no longer applies. Private property falls under the TDSR, the total debt servicing ratio, which allows up to 55% of your income to go toward debt repayment.
Right.
So suddenly their monthly ceiling jumps to $6,600. So instead of a $1 million loan, the bank is now willing to lend them $1.84 million.
This blows my mind every time I look at the math. Even though the private condo is significantly more expensive per square foot, the banking rules actually let you borrow nearly double the amount to buy it. You might end up with more usable space or maybe an extra bedroom in a private condo simply because the bank allows you a larger loan.
Yeah, you're paying a higher premium, but your purchasing power artificially expands.
It's just wild.
It really highlights why we have these distinct frameworks. I mean, the MSR exists to protect the middle to lower income brackets from over-leveraging themselves on subsidized public housing. It's a safety net.
Makes sense.
But the TDSR, applied to private property, operates on the assumption that if you're entering the free market, you have a higher risk tolerance and you can handle a heavier debt load. But it creates this bizarre friction where buyers feel poorer when shopping for public housing than they do when shopping for private luxury.
Right, so the bank says, sure, you can borrow $1.8 million for the condo. Great. But getting the loan approved is the easy part. The real nightmare is surviving the tax timeline. Whether you're fighting for an EC or taking that $1.8 million loan for a private condo, you have to navigate the ABSD. And this is the beast that keeps upgraders awake at night.
It really is. Well, let's start with the baseline financing first, just to set the stage. If you're keeping things conservative and relying on an HDB housing loan for your next property, assuming it's an HDB resale, the LTV, or loan-to-value limit, is capped at 85%. And the interest rate is pegged at the CPF OA rate plus 0.1%.
So effectively 2.6%.
Right. But if you're stepping up to private property, you're dealing with bank loans, which means your LTV is capped at 75%. You have to cover that 25% gap in cash and CPF right at the start.
But the LTV down payment is just the appetizer. The main course is the ABSD, the additional buyer stamp duty. For a Singaporean buying their second property, the ABSD is a flat 20%. And let's be very clear about how this works. It is not a hypothetical tax that gets waived if you promise to sell your HDB later.
Oh, no.
You have to physically pay it up front within 14 days of signing the purchase document. So you're buying a $2 million private condo, that is a $400,000 tax bill you have to front in cash or CPF.
It's an enormous liquidity trap. And the government requires that massive upfront payment to discourage people from just casually holding on to multiple properties. So to get that 20% refunded, a married couple must sell their current HDB flat within 6 months.
It's like the government holding a $400,000 hostage deposit to guarantee you actually let go of your HDB.
Yeah.
And here is the detail that completely ruins people. The clock for that 6-month refund window runs strictly from the purchase date of the second property.
Yes.
It doesn't start when the property gets its TOP. It doesn't start when you collect the keys.
Which completely upends the traditional buy first, sell later strategy for new launches.
Exactly. So what does this all mean? If the 6-month clock starts the moment I sign the papers to buy a condo that isn't even going to be built for 3 years, I've had to sell my current home immediately. Where am I supposed to live for 3 years? The whole buy first, sell later strategy for new builds is basically dead for regular upgraders, isn't it?
It basically is, and this raises an important question about timeline management and, frankly, risk tolerance. It forces a really brutal choice. The safest route is to sell your HDB first. You secure your funds, you avoid the ABSD entirely because you technically don't own a property when you buy the new one.
Right. That sounds safe.
It is, but the trade-off is immense friction. You have to move into a rental property for years while your new condo is built. You're paying dead money in rent, you're paying for storage, you're uprooting your family twice.
And rent in Singapore isn't exactly cheap right now. You could easily burn $100,000 in rental costs over 3 years.
Exactly. The alternative is you buy the new property first to secure the exact unit and floor level you want, pay the $400,000 ABSD upfront, and then race the clock to sell your HDB within 6 months.
That sounds incredibly stressful.
Imagine the stress. Month 3 rolls around and you haven't gotten any good offers. Month 5 hits and panic sets in. You might have to drop your HDB asking price by $50,000 or $80,000 just to secure a buyer in time. Because if that clock runs out, you forfeit that $400,000 tax refund entirely. The government keeps it.
You're cornered into a fire sale. So if there's one thing you take away from our deep dive today, it's this. Upgrading in 2026 isn't about finding the nicest pool or the best balcony view anymore. It's a highest-stakes math equation putting a 14-year EC lock-in against a ticking 6-month tax clock in a dual mortgage cash crunch. You really have to game out the worst-case scenarios before you sign anything.
You really do. You have to ask yourself if your family's cash flow can handle the shock of a delayed HDB sale, or if you mentally have the stamina to move into a rental unit for 3 years.
Looking at all this data, the 20% ABSD hostage deposit, the 55% TDSR stress test, the 14-year EC freeze, it actually brings up a completely different strategy we noticed buried in the research. We spent this entire time talking about the complexities and costs of leaving your current flat. But the data shows a growing cohort of homeowners who are doing the math on upgrading and deciding to completely pivot.
Yeah, it's one of the most interesting behavioral shifts in the market right now. When families look at the sheer amount of capital they'd burn on moving $100,000 on temporary rent, stamp duties, agent fees, and just the stress of a maxed out TDSR loan they're choosing to redirect that capital inward.
They're staying put. But they aren't just living with the space they outgrew. We're seeing families taking that $150,000 to $250,000 they would have lost to transaction friction and pouring it into massive structural renovation.
Yes.
They're taking older, sprawling 5-room HDB flats and completely reconfiguring the floor plans, hacking walls to create 6- or 7-room custom spaces.
They're essentially building a luxury condo interior inside their fully paid off or nearly paid off public housing shell. They get the bespoke space they want without resetting the debt clock for another 30 years or dealing with the ABSD anxiety.
It really reframes the whole concept, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, is true luxury taking on massive debt and 14-year lock-ins just to squeeze into a smaller private condo for the prestigious address and a shared swimming pool? Or is true luxury having a massive, hyper-personalized space that you already own outright with zero financial stress?
It fundamentally challenges the traditional Singaporean real estate trajectory. The assumption has always been that success means moving from public to private housing. But the math in 2026 is forcing people to redefine success as financial freedom and customized utility.
It brings us right back to that feeling we talked about at the start. You're standing in your living room looking at the walls, thinking you've outgrown the space. Maybe the next step isn't navigating the nightmare of ABSD timelines and temporary rentals. Maybe it's just knocking down a wall and diving deeper into the space you already call home. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take your time, crunch your own numbers with a clear head, and whatever you decide, make sure the math works for you, not just the bank.